What is happening, y'all? Cowboy here, and in this video we're going to be taking a look at my top 5 strength weapons from the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC. Now obviously this video is going to be filled with spoilers as we're talking about weapons in the DLC and it just came out, but since I have some extra time until the walkthrough is ready, I've been working on a couple guides taking a look at, my favorite spells from the DLC, favorite weapons, stuff like that. So either way, let's jump into it. Spoiler city from here on out, and the first weapon we're going to be talking about is this bad boy right here. This is the Smith Script Great Hammer. Now this is a weapon that can be thrown and then it returns to you, which is incredibly useful. It does get a scaling strength if you make it heavy. However, I choose to make this frost because you can't put any grease or like blood flame or anything like that on the weapon. So just to show the damage difference here, you can see at cold we are at a 903 base AR, which is pretty respectable. If I were to go to the Ash of War and change that out to heavy, you can see still doing solid at 764. But like I said, if we were to go down and try to apply grease or something to this, because of the unique nature of it being a Smith Script weapon, unfortunately we can't do that. However, cold actually works really well for this. Keep in mind that cold weapons, once you apply frostbite to the target, you're going to get a little burst of damage on top of causing them to take 25% more, which is solid in its own right. Now this has a base just Great Hammer moveset, so if you're a fan of things like the Great Stars, this is going to feel right at home. Our jumping heavy attack is standard with what you would already expect, but the nice thing about this is going to be with the sprinting heavy, the rolling heavy, or just the default heavy, where you're going to chuck the hammer like that at your targets. And what's so fantastic about this weapon, this is so good in my opinion, because when it comes to melee, we don't really have a way to deal with targets at range. We could pull out a bow or maybe do like Beast Claw and throw with the Beast Claw, but just being like yeet. And as you can see, it has the ability to multi-hit. We can also do quick throws with it, but this thing is just an absolute beast. I love this so much. Out of all the various strength weapons from the DLC, this is probably my favorite. On top of that, we can also get some decent amplifications. We have a smithing talisman that'll boost the throwing damage up by 10% on it. On top of that, we can also take advantage of axe to boost the charge throw of it. And then we can take advantage of the two-handed sword talisman to boost the damage thrown when two-handed as well. So this can become very strong. And with the DLC scaling, you'll be throwing it on out and hitting upwards of 2,000 damage with a throw. Incredibly solid weapon all around. And you'll find this in one of the forges of the DLC. I'm going to let y'all to explore some stuff on your own, but I'll give you some hints on where you find stuff. Moving on from there, the next thing we're going to be talking about is the Gazing Finger. Now, this thing is an absolute beast of a weapon. Kind of unique requirements here with 20 int, 8 dex, and 14 faith, but it gets up to B in strength, 989 sheet attack power. And what's so powerful about this thing is the unique, the Kotor's Resentment. Now, by default, this just works very similar to a hammer. We have a very kind of unique heavy attack where we're like bow, smack, and then stand up and smack again. Kind of goofy looking. But the Ash of War is what really sells me on this weapon. Now, we have two weapons that come to mind when I think of incredibly devastating Ashes of War, the Blasphemous Blade, and then, of course, the Ruin's Greatsword. Both of those are capable of just taking out tons and tons of enemies. Now, what if we had something like that, but with an even wider range? And that is what we get with this hammer. The unique on this, we can charge it up. Look at that. It's like a 5-way split Ruin's Greatsword. Thing is absolutely monstrous. And there's a quick version too. We can just throw it out and get a little blast that's right in front of us, and that one will still do decent damage as well. But this thing is a monster. For just clearing content of the game, we are just pumping damage. And like honestly, from here you can probably see just how far it goes. Look at that. It doesn't quite have as much like outward range as a Blasphemous Blade. I'd say it's probably about 75% of it, but the fact that it does like a 5-way split as wide as it is, that is undeniably powerful. And on top of that, I mean, it's just a giant hammer. This thing will absolutely bonk your enemies and get you those big staggery hits. I will say the charge heavy is a little awkward But, you know, this thing cannot be underestimated. It is very, very potent, especially with that weapon art. And this comes from a hidden boss that's pretty late in the DLC. The only thing I'll say is try and find the manor. And once you find the manor, you should maybe follow the quest line of the manor. So moving on from there to the next one, the Horned Warrior's Greatsword. This is 1916-13, goes up to B in strength, and when we are two-handing this bad boy, we get up to 814 AR. Now, from the base moveset, this is just a very basic curved greatsword. You know, it's got a couple things that I like. We have the how we can go heavy attack into the second charged heavy, which does that double hit, which is pretty nice. But, you know, if you just like curved greatswords, you're going to feel right at home with this weapon. There's nothing about it that's too crazy until, once again, the Ash of War comes into the equation, and that is Horn Calling Storm, which you'll see in just a second. I want to get this guy to call everybody over. Now, I think one of the things that is so attractive about strength weapons is when you're surrounded and you're just, you know, you're basically doing your berserk cosplay. You're cutting down swathes of enemies with giant swings. And, you know, at some point we think, what if the swing could be even bigger? What if I want to cut down enemies, but I want to cut down more enemies. And that's where this comes in. Taking spin to win to a whole new level. Very strong, excellent shield break, excellent stagger capability, very powerful damage. This comes towards the very end of the game, sadly, one of the very last legacy dungeons, but an enemy that you kill there will drop this, so this one is pretty hard to miss, but very, very solid weapon. Moving on to our fourth weapon, the Ancient Meteoric Ore Greatsword. Now this one is a little bit weird. We have B Strength and B Arcane, despite no Arcane requirement on it. But 35, 10, 16, while two-handed, this one gets up to 840. And its base moveset, very similar to the Colossal Greatswords. We have a big poke focus, so we got the quick poke as well as the charge poke. So if you like Pierce Greatswords, you're going to feel right at home with this thing. Black meteoric type look to it. But the real sell for this is once again the Ash of War. The Ash of War on this is phenomenal. And another thing that comes to mind when playing with colossal weapons is usually speed. You know, you're not usually the fastest. You might be like going for a running poke. You might be rolling and you're like trying to like, I gotta get in on this guy. Where's my opportunity? When do I get to attack? I'm not fast enough. And all of that does not matter because of White Light Charge. This thing staggers very fast. The AoE on it isn't that big, but what I like is one of the biggest things about greatswords, like I said, is the speed. And this allows you to take a very different approach to playing the greatsword, where you can run around and then quickly dash in and then execute that move, doing that little explosion there. Definitely on the pricier side of things for the various Ashes of War we have, but I think the speed of that alone makes up for it, because speed is not usually something that we think of when it comes to colossal weapons, but being able to dash in on a target like that and take them out, whether they're a little farther away or maybe it's a boss and you roll back and you're trying to close the gap. Very, very good. And on top of that, the damage is solid. You know, you're never going to find a colossal weapon that doesn't have good damage. And on to our final weapon. Oh, which this one, by the way, this one you also find in a forge. So as you find those forges, make sure you dive deep. Our final weapon, big spoiler territory as it comes from the final boss of the DLC, but Greatsword of Redon Light. Now there are two different Greatsword of Redons that we can get in the game. The light one in particular has light speed slash on it, which is insanely powerful. Now, this weapon's base is very similar to the Redon Greatswords, which is already solid, very heavy, but you know what you're getting with a Redon weapon. 38, 12, 15 on the stat requirements, up to 916 AR. But the real killer of this is going to be the Ash of War. The Redon weapon is already good in its own right, but with light speed slash, we have a quick multi-slash attack that comes down, and that's just the base one. This can also be charged to do even more damage, and I think this is going to be a big popular weapon in PvP. Trying to get them all gathered up so y'all can see the AoE potential of this. can see how even after I land, the rest of those slashes come out. You can see this one is very aggressive. Very aggressive with the way it works. But insanely strong. Absolute insanity. Now, while those would be my top 5, there's one more weapon that I want to take a look at. Keeping up with spoiler territory, there is a different Redon greatsword that we can get access to in the DLC. Just going to sort things out by item type, and the greatsword of Elden Lord. Now, the only real difference, this one weighs 20, this one weighs 16. You can say they have different stat requirements on them, but the damage is going to be identical. So regardless of which of the Redon weapons you want to go for, you're going to have the same damage on them. But whereas the other one had the light speed slash, this one has promised consort, which is slightly different, but also a very, very fun ability to use. This one's very good. I mean, nothing against it. I just personally, I prefer the instantaneous nature of Lightspeed Slash, whereas this is more of a build-up. That being said, the damage in this is definitely undeniable. You can pump out insane damage with this. It's just, you know, we have to go through this, I guess you could call it a dance of blades, and generally things aren't just going to sit around and let you get off a dance like that. They're going to try to interrupt you, which is why I personally prefer Lightspeed. But either way, there are tons and tons and tons of other strength weapons to find in the DLC. There's a couple that are just, you know, completely out there. But these were the 5 that stood out the most to me, that I had the most fun playing with personally. So either way, we're going to wrap things up here. We're also going to be taking a look at what I would consider to be the top 5 dexterity weapons of the DLC as well. So make sure to stay tuned for that.